right. We're going to go ahead and get started here. We got a lot to cover. I want to make sure we have time. If you are first time here today, because you haven't been some of the other weeks, you are staying for a class called Navigating LGBTQ. So we call it, my purpose in this class is to help us better understand this world in which we live for the purpose of bringing the gospel into this issue. And the gospel is very important to bring into this issue, not just to share with somebody else, but really so that we understand what does the gospel have to do with this particular issue. In fact, next week, that's going to be the topic of what we're going to cover next week, is how do we bring the gospel clearly to understand the whole thing, but also how we respond to other people. So the first week, we started with my own journey with my daughter and her situation and where it went. And if you want to hear that story, we recorded it. We didn't just post it out there because it's my daughter's journey. But it's our journey as well. But we do have a recording of it. If you want to hear it, I would be more than happy to send that to you. So email me if you can, john@frontlinebible.com, john@frontlinebible.com, and then just put in the subject thing or whatever. I want that first week recording. And so anyway, that was our story, and I'd be more than happy to share it with anybody who would like that. Last week, we talked about how to help us better understand the person who's coming along who says, hey, I'm gay, hey, I'm lesbian, hey, I'm a homosexual, I'm intersex, I'm queer, I'm any of the other stuff. And what do we do to understand them? So I have a handout if anybody wants that handout. If you were not with us last week, I have 10 copies. Okay, so this is what it is it's a, you know what I'm going to do? Just one, okay. Jen, I'm conscripting you for service. Can you see if anybody who wants a copy of that paper? What this is it's a list of definitions that are, and the definitions come out of this particular book called Guiding Families of LGBT Loved Ones for every pastor and parent and all who care. I feel like this book is an excellent resource for a positive, hope-filled response to people who are struggling with these things, that doesn't jam the Bible down their throat, but also gives hope of something else. I think it's just a great way of melding it together. So this book is called Guiding Families of LGBT plus Loved Ones. It's by an organization called Posture Shift Books. The comment that they make in here is, it's important that we as churches and as Christians don't change our position on the issue, that we still take a position that homosexuality, all of that, just like so many other things out there, is not God's design. It's not God's design for wholeness and all those things. It's not God's design. But our posture that we take with regards to the position needs to be very, very carefully managed. And so this book is called Guiding Families. This is the Essentials edition, and then they have the Expanded edition. But the things you're getting last week and today are from them. So last week was looking more from the person who says, hey, I am this way. How do we respond to them? And so the first thing that we had was that. And then the other thing we talked about last week was how teens come out. And so I have one other document here to pass out if anybody wants this one. This one, thank you, Jen. This one here is, there's 6 stages of how someone comes out. And there's a process that oftentimes it goes through. And like we shared last week in the diagram, it's not until the 10th step when they finally say, oh, I'm gay. That there's been step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 that was being dealt with behind the scenes before somebody comes out. Now, once they come out, the question is, how do we respond? What do we do? But when we hear them say, I'm now out, I'm now gay, I'm now lesbian, I'm now this, they've been working through 1 through 9 potentially for a course of years. So the way in which we respond oftentimes is we respond with shock, we respond with anger, we respond because we're just getting the news. But they've been building this. And so last week we talked about how do we understand the journey that somebody took to bring them to where they're at. Because the more that we understand the journey, the more compassion that we can share when they finally have the courage to come out and say, hey, I am this. So, are there any questions, comments, whatever, from the last 2 weeks? One thing I was asked by somebody this past week, can you please take the microphone to people when they're asking questions or saying things? Because online, all you hear is, and then I say something, and they're like, oh, that was great. Yeah, I'm sure it was. So if you want to say something, if you have a question, I will ask somebody to bring the microphone to you. Maybe Kevin, you can be my mic guy or something on that. Okay. All right. With that as the backdrop, we are now going to move to this week, which is coming at it from the perspective of us. Those who maybe are not struggling with it, that this is not something that's a part of our story. How do we respond? And so, once again, this is out of this book, Guiding Families. This paper is, it's called the 6 Acceptance Stages. Jen, you ready for another trip around again? You want to do the other half? Okay, all right. There we go. Okay, so this is what we're calling 6 acceptance stages. Now we're going to talk through this, and I'm sure there will be some questions. I'm sure there will be some comments. And then one of the things we'll do is actually we're going to hear a story this morning. And I feel like stories communicate an awful lot, and especially stories of hurt. And the one thing I really like about this story is it's in the middle of the story. This story is not finished by any means. And therefore, it's a chance for us to feel like, hey, we don't just talk about things when they're fixed. Okay, let's say that. We don't talk about them when they're fixed. In fact, the most important thing is bringing it out in the open while it's going on, because that's how we journey together. That's how we better understand each other. So anyway, let's talk through this a little bit. If you remember with my own story with Mallory, my daughter, she was, I believe, in 7th grade when she finally came out. Like I shared a couple weeks ago, thank you guys. Like I shared a couple weeks ago, when she came out, I was in the hallway, she was in the hallway, and she informed us that she was gay. And I guess what had happened was she had informed her mom just a little bit prior because her mom had found out this information, but she was scared to death to tell her dad. So finally she worked up the courage because my wife says, Mallory has something to say to you. And it was like, oh boy. And so then she informed me right there in the hallway. What's that? Yeah. And she informs me of this. And she talks about, hey, I tried to pray the gay away. I tried to do all that sort of stuff. It doesn't work. I am gay. Matter of fact. And I was like, well, okay. I guess now we got to put grace into action. So no LGBT plus child is a grief. Yet parents and other family members often experience degrees of grieving when a child comes out. Some experience all stages, others experience only certain stages. Some cycle through the stages many times, often non-linearly. Okay, so in other words, you're not going to go, oh, step 1, shock, step 2, denial, step 3, anger, step 4, bargaining. It's oftentimes this moves around all over the place. Some cycle through stages many times before reaching acceptance. For other parents, acceptance comes immediately. And we're going to talk about that acceptance today. We're going to talk about what that looks like. So shock, here's the first one. Even parents who already suspect that their child is LGBTQ plus can experience shock. Others who had no idea may experience little to no shock. No one can predict how a parent will respond. One unsuspecting mother said, "While I had no idea, it is just one more thing we know about him. I am so thankful he told us." Others feel their world has been turned upside down, like their understanding of life, family, and faith is collapsing. I think when my daughter said this to me, if I think back, I don't believe I saw it coming. I knew she dressed differently. She went through a phase where she was dressing more boyish, but I mean, plenty of girls are like tomboys, right? I mean, just because you're a girl doesn't mean you dress a certain way or whatever else. I mean, it's such a spectrum of how to dress. And so, but I remember when she said this to me, it was like, really? You're gay? Like, just kind of a shock. For how many of you have you experienced maybe something similar where there's somebody come out and was it overwhelmed? Did you have to kind of catch your breath a little bit? Maybe shock is a very real experience. For others, initial shock may draw parents into a self-protect mode. Similar to the fight or flight switch designed to protect us, a panic can cause parents to deny the reality before them. It is similar to what a child experiences during the hide stage. If not careful, parents will minimize or discredit their child's disclosure. One mother said, "You are not lesbian, you have dated boys." One father said, "We don't have homosexuals in our family." Now, okay, let's play this out a little bit. Last week we talked about the person who is struggling with this and how they would come out. Okay? So that's this journey over here. What we're talking about today is our journey. And one of the things, I know I appreciate some of the Life Center, and I know it's not new to the Life Center, but one of the things they bring out are feelings are not facts. Feelings are not facts, or maybe not necessarily facts. They might be facts, but just because I feel something doesn't mean it's necessarily a fact. But there may be times where when somebody comes out, brings out this information, especially if there's some shock involved, there may be that immediate response that comes out. And oftentimes that immediate response may not be the most helpful response, but yet it's still, you feel it. And so in this case, here it is, you are not lesbian, you've dated boys. I remember those feelings clearly, and I tried to convince my daughter of it, especially early on when I said, I remember Daniel. And Daniel was this little redheaded kid that she really liked in school. I mean, really liked Daniel. Multiple years, I got Daniel in my class again. And, I never heard her talk about girls like, oh man, I got so-and-so, I can't wait to date her. And never, ever. And yet all of a sudden now she comes out, she says, no, I am a lesbian. I am gay. I am whatever word she uses. And so the question was, no, that's not true. As if I could deny her reality, make her go, Dad, that's right. I did like boys. Maybe I'm not. Remember, step 1 through 9 or some combination in there has already taken place. So when she comes to tell me, my simple denial, or whatever, is not going to convince her otherwise in that moment. Anger. When denial fails, parents may try to force their preferred reality. When this fails, frustration can spill over into anger. Underneath that anger is their own hurt, but expressions of anger will hurt their child. Anger can cause a teen to fight to validate their identity, just as parents fight to deny it. How many of you have experienced this? Maybe in a situation or seen somebody. I mean, especially amongst young people today, this is becoming more and more and more prevalent. The difference is timing. Parents and LGBT youth can experience identical emotions. The difference is timing. An LGBT plus child is at the finish line when parents are not even wanting to be at the starting gate. I love the way that's said. Parents and children need one another during this time. Patience, listening, and respect are critical to preserving relational connection and trust. Bargaining. Many LGBT plus youth think or are led to think they can, quote, pray the gay away. My wife or my daughter said those exact words to us. I tried to pray the gay away and it didn't work for me. Therefore, I am gay. As if all you have to do is say a prayer and presto changeo, it's made everything magical for you as well, right? How many of you have prayed for something once and God changed you? Maybe you prayed for it multiple times and automatically God always does what you pray for, right? Is it possible that there's a journey that has to take place and God's refining you? He's bringing something to light in you. Coming out then, thinking it might work, they conclude that there is no reason to tell anyone. Sadly, this leads LGBT plus youth to languish in isolation. Coming out then is not just a declaration of identity. It is also an exit from isolation. Parents in the bargaining stage may try to negotiate their child into silence. One father told his son, "This is not you. Don't tell anyone." Lost in translation is the reality that most LGBT plus teens have already been waiting a long time. Attempts to bargain an LGBT plus child into continued isolation is often internalized as parent rejection. Depression. Parents or other family members who deny reality, express anger, and propose impossible demands usually damage relational trust. Acceptance begins when parents realize that they cannot change their child's sexuality or gender identity. This recognition can fuel a new cycle of grief. Giving up control of hopes and dreams for our children leads to sadness, and for some, serious depression. I'm sure if we stopped right now, we could probably go around the room and share stories of what people have faced in going through this. I remember thinking to myself, and this was further down the journey, when my daughter informed me, I will never be getting married. I will never be doing that. I will never be having children. I will never have that. I want nothing to do with God. So many of the things that are part and parcel of our family, she's basically like, forget you, Mom and Dad. I don't care. I'm not going to do it. And I would be lying if I told you that I never tried to argue her out of that. Oh, someday, I believe you're going to grow out of this phase. Mom and Dad, it's not a phase. Maybe you've heard that before. It's not a phase. Not a phase. I'm not going to grow out of this. Well, you know what? As a dad, I'm going to choose to believe that someday you're going to grow out of it. Well, I'm never going to. Well, I'm just going to choose anyway to believe that someday, I'm not going to. And then the circle as we fight and we fight and we fight. And coming to a place of surrender, just because you surrender doesn't mean you're happy. And as we had to surrender that and that feeling of what happens if my daughter never changes? What happens if this is not just a phase? It can lead to depression, especially if your expectations were very different. Go on to the last one. There are quick and easy or long and difficult paths toward acceptance. While there is no one right way to grieve, it is critical for parents to handle any grief within a loving posture. No parent can just turn off their hurt and disappointment. But we must bring grief to Christ and our support network rather than pouring it onto our children. Otherwise, our grief will likely layer additional trauma, family rejection, upon our child's heart. It is important to remember that acceptance of your child does not mean you are approving of gay relationships. I'll say that last part again. It is important to remember that acceptance of your child does not mean you are approving of gay relationships. Now, I don't know about you, but that is very difficult to separate. Because what I do and who I am are pretty closely tied together, right? And yet in reality, think about this a little bit. How many of you recognize that you are a child of God? Your identity is secure. If you have accepted Jesus Christ, your identity is you are a child of God. That's what your identity is. How many of you have ever acted different than your identity? All right. I know that was a long time ever. Okay. How many of you yesterday, how many of you yesterday didn't act like your identity? Now here's the challenge though, and this is what we're going to talk about next week when we're going to talk about bringing the gospel into this whole issue, because there's such an important realization when you can see your identity and how when you lead with your identity it changes how you act. But if you don't understand your identity, then it all gets all jumbled up and you begin to think that the way I feel is the way that I am. And this is this is across the board for Christians in general. This is not just homosexual specific, okay? So we're going to talk about that next week. But when we understand our identity, it changes the way that I live, or at least it should, as I begin to act more and more like my identity. But the world is so turned upside down right now because the world says, hey, what's your identity? Well, your identity is, I'm gay, or hey, I'm straight, I'm cis, I'm trans, I'm whatever else. And we throw around these identities like that's the sum total of who we are. Well, I'm a heterosexual, therefore, because I'm a heterosexual, then I'm bound to identify sexually with all the opposite species, or all the opposite people from me. Versus I'm a homosexual, therefore I'm bound to identify in sexual ways with all of this. And so when the world today is pushing this, it can be very difficult when a loved one comes back and says, no, I am this, therefore I will act this way, and you have to accept it. Versus being able to say, I have to separate, even in my own mind, behavior from identity in order to be able to still accept you. And that's hard, really hard to do. I want you to turn in your Bibles to John chapter 4. Actually, my apologies on that. I made my first mistake this month. John chapter 2. John chapter 2. That's right. That's right. John chapter 2. Verse 1. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. And Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. This, the first of his miraculous signs, Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. For how many of you have you never heard this story before? All right, so everybody here is familiar. Okay, maybe Amy, you're not familiar with this. This is a very, very common story. Very common story in the Bible. People have talked a lot about it. But the interesting thing about the story is this. Jesus makes wine. Now, now some people want to reason around this and say, no, it wasn't wine. I'm sure it was just grape juice. I'm sure there was no alcohol in it because Jesus would never condone drinking, right? So, interesting though, we find within the story, the bridegroom, or the master of the banquet, because this was a big deal, okay? Because this would look really bad on the bridegroom. If the bridegroom, because weddings back then were multiple day affairs. This was not just a singular afternoon event. This was multiple day affair. And so if you're going to get married, you were responsible to provide all the food and libations necessary for the party to be a party. And if you ran out, well, then it showed poor planning, poor execution, whatever else. And so this was a cultural thing that Jesus was invited to the wedding. So he goes there. I'm guessing at this point in time that there were people who were drinking around, and I'm guessing there probably were some people who were drunk. So the master says, Mary, we got a problem here. We're out of wine. Mary says to Jesus, not in so many words, can you help these drunk people still have more wine? Now think about it like that. Jesus was being asked to help drunk people with their drinking. How many of you have thought about this story in that way before? Okay? So Jesus is being asked to help drunk people keep drinking. What does he do? Wouldn't that be a great opportunity for Jesus to stand up and give a good sermon about the dangers of alcohol? I mean, this would have been the perfect opportunity. Hey, look, you ran out. Clearly God is judging you. God's judging you because you ran out of wine, and these people probably should stop anyway. Their livers are dying. Therefore, we need to let people know this is clearly not what God's design would be. And so I am not going to stand by and watch this happen. Therefore, I will not participate. Instead, what does he do? He makes more wine. And not just cheap stuff. Not just the box wine. You know, those $3 boxes or $4. Not just the box wine. I mean, the good stuff. He actually makes the good stuff. And helps the party continue. So you would think that Jesus is now going to go around and help other weddings. I mean, he is the party guy. Like, the party is now here. Jesus has arrived. This is when the good stuff gets brought out. This is the last time that we see water being turned into wine. No other time does this happen. So what does that tell you? What's that? Show up for the first part. What I want to tell you is this. I believe we can see Jesus acting in ways that would make good Christians today uncomfortable. And yet we also see Jesus acting in ways that don't become patterns. So in this particular case, he was willing to make wine to help the drunk party continue, and that's what happened, and that was the last time he did it. Because in this particular case, he needed to make wine. But in this particular case over here, he shouldn't keep making wine. The reason why this comes up is because this is oftentimes a question that I'm asked. In fact, some of you have asked it of me here. Pastor John, are you going to talk about this? And the question is, should I go to a gay wedding? I have been invited to go to a gay wedding, and should I go to the gay wedding? Well, what is the good Christian response to that? Whew, man, I see division already here. I see no. I see heck yeah. I hear maybe. All right, how many no's do we have here? Raise your hand. Be loud. Be proud. How many no's do we have? No. Biblically, we should not go to a gay. Keep them up. I want to see. Everybody look around, okay? Everybody look around. All right, you see. Okay? All right. How many yeses do we have? That yes, you should go to that gay wedding. How many yeses do we have? You don't know how, so you maybe. So are you a maybe or you would go? Hopefully, by the way, for those listening online, the answer was go for the wine. So that's a question. Maybe. So anyway, I'm not going to answer it right now. I want you to hear a story. There's a good friend of mine. His name is Jerry. Jerry, come on down here. I'm going to have you share a little bit of your story. I met Jerry. Jerry, when did I? Yeah, at Kevin's son's party thing. All right, Jerry, you can. Are you sure you want to stand? We didn't have wine. All right, Jerry, why don't you stand right here in the middle? Here, you want to hold on to the table? Yeah. There you go. Put that down. I met Jerry, and he's a great friend of Kevin, known Kevin a long time, and because he's a great friend of Kevin, he has become a great friend of mine. And I have enjoyed getting to know Jerry quite a bit, and I think it's mutual. So I've asked Jerry just to be willing to share some of the story. There's clearly lots more to share than this, but my hope is that what he shares maybe inspires you about this very issue. So Jerry, the only thing I say is get that mic right up there. That's right. Okay.
Okay, how's that? And it is true. It is mutual. I feel like I've gained some old friends who I just met being around this church. This is a great spot, you guys. This is really a great spot. So in my preparation, I realized that this story will take way longer, and it's way bigger than we have time for. And so I'm going to refer to my notes because that'll keep me on track, okay? I had hoped to do it just from my heart, but I need to stay on track. Just to give you a little context, I was divorced from my son's mother. My son's name is Matthew. I was divorced from her when he was 2. And as a result of that and ongoing situations for a lot of years, I knew that I was not being a good father. I was not there. I wasn't there when I should have been. And a lot of things, I'm sure, went wrong in his world because he didn't have me, his dad, there. He did have a stepdad who was good to him, and I'm grateful for that always. But I did, as he moved into adulthood, I tried to work a lot at reestablishing and trying to stay with the connection that would identify me as his father. And and I don't remember exactly the circumstances, but I know I was at his apartment, and he had called me there for something, and he was an emotional mess. He had had a breakup with some gay friends, and he was a mess. He was crying, and he finally just blurted out, Dad, I think I'm gay. And we talk about response, and my response, I'm grateful for my response. My response to him was, if you're trying to push me away, Matthew, it'll take more than that, quite a bit more. In fact, I can't imagine anything that you could say or do that would push me away. So that's kind of the context of my situation. Resolved to stay connected with him by supporting him in his activities. He was never the athlete in school, in a school that emphasized athletics. And then when he did turn athletic, I was really able to be a part of that. He realized that he was a pretty good runner, and then he realized that he enjoyed swimming, and then he realized that he was pretty good on a bike, and you can see where this is leading. He became quite the triathlete. In fact, he ran 2 full Ironman competitions. He's probably run 10 or 12 half Ironmen, and I've been at most of them for him by my own choice, and I was really, really grateful to be able to do those kinds of things to show that I was supportive of him, even in his gay world. He moved to Austin, Texas, which is a really, really liberal location in Texas. They always kind of chuckle down there that this is Austin is a blue dot in a sea of red, or the remark is often made, help, we're surrounded by Texas. But Austin's very liberal and very, very friendly to the homosexual community. But in the process, again, I resolved to stay connected. And part of that came from a good friend of mine who's gone now, who was, in his old life, had been a flaming gay. And he said, whatever you do, don't lose communication with your son. Don't break off the communications. So that was one of kind of things that drove me in all of my decision-making around my son. Then came the I took a posture of I'll never leave you alone, and he knew that, and there's some situations that developed where, like one time he had a bad situation in a gay cruise kind of thing, and he had communicated with me, Dad, if you can get a hold of me. I'm in a situation where I need my dad, if you know what I mean. You know what that does to a dad's heart? You know you're going to break everything down that you can break down to get there. Then came a serious boyfriend, and his name is Tony. And eventually out of that came the announcement that they were going to be married. And this was not long after the Supreme Court decision that allowed gay marriage, and Texas was already all in on that, and so they went ahead with plans for a gay wedding. And in that process, they invited me to come, and I could tell that it was a sincere invitation. They really did want me to come. They were willing to pay all of my expenses, everything, to get me to come to their wedding. And I really struggled with that for a while, and finally made a decision that I was going to go. And all along I had hoped that maybe somewhere in there that God wouldn't necessarily take away his gayness, but that he might drop a woman in his life that would sweep him off his feet, so to speak. And I had, over time, because I had been able to visit him in Austin, I had met some of his co-workers. I'd been around people that he was hanging out with, and there were some pretty cool-looking ladies that could have, I would have, yeah, this is the one for him. Anyhow, it didn't happen. The invitation to come was genuine. I prayed, sought counsel, and I landed on Colossians 3:15, which there are many versions of it, but basically it's let the peace of God be the umpire. Let it help you in settling questions that arise. And I landed on yes, that I needed to go. And so those plans went into motion. I got to Texas. Tony and Matthew were clearly happy that I was there. One of the highlights of that was that they showed me to the room at the resort where they were having their wedding, and they even said it out loud. We chose this room specifically for you, Dad, because we knew you would love it. It had windows that were overlooking Lake Austin, a beautiful garden area in this place, and I mean, it was a beautiful room, and they were right. It was a place that spoke to my heart. It was a place of beauty, and they had specifically picked that room for me. His mom and his stepdad were going to come, and at the last minute, for various reasons, decided not to come, which kind of left a gap in their planning, their wedding planning. And among other things, they came to me, and it was Matthew mostly. Tony wasn't too involved in these discussions, but Matthew came to me and said, would you be willing to say something at the reception? Matthew's stepdad was supposed to say something, and Tony's stepdad was also, he was saying something, and it was he was going to offer a prayer over the meal and those sorts of things, and they were trying to balance this a little bit, and Walt was not there. So they asked me if I would step in and say something. Needless to say, I struggled on that one. How do you say something at a gay wedding reception without pronouncing a blessing? And I had some really, really good help with that, and figuring out how to do that. And it was an interesting journey to figure out how to say something without necessarily blessing a gay wedding. And I'll come back to that in just a second. Maybe about an hour before the ceremony, Matthew came to my room, and I could tell he was really edgy. He was nervous about this one. But he said to me, Dad, I'm going to ask you for something, and please feel free to turn me down if you need to. But would you walk with me into the ceremony? Now, to frame this thing, he was clear, this is not about giving me away. It's not about anything except walking with me so that I don't have to walk alone. Tony's mom was going to walk with him into the ceremony, and Matthew's mom was supposed to walk with him into the ceremony, and she was not there. And he came to me and said, would you walk with me so that I don't have to walk alone? How do you say no to that? And what would have happened if I wasn't at this wedding? So I think of that in terms of my own story now, my own circumstances. So when he asked me that, even the Lord's words came immediately into my head. I will never leave you nor forsake you. And that was what I was trying to live in my life with Matthew. I will never leave you nor forsake you. So of course I said yes, I would walk with him. Time came for the reception, and my time for remarks. And it was interesting how God had helped me to frame that in the sense of, and it wasn't said in these words, but it was not accepting their gay marriage, but accepting them as human beings, as two men who I knew that God loved more than I could love them, and that I was offering to them my support, my willingness to be there for them, no matter what, and that either of them could come to me at any time, and I was expressing that publicly now in front of a largely gay crowd, but it was an expression of God's love. Even though I didn't use those words specifically because I knew I would push those people away. And in the middle of that, in the middle of my remarks, applause broke out from a gay crowd. I went, oh man, what happened here? And as I look in retrospect, I feel like it was God offering me that opportunity to be representative of him in a gay crowd. after the fact, I had 2 gay couples come up to me and say, "That's the best wedding talk I have ever heard in my life." And I went, "What is going on here?" It's just crazy. So anyhow, as I wrap this up, I say to you, from the moment that the ceremony started, I surrendered the whole thing to God and said, "I'm going to have fun. I am laying this down. I could bring my righteousness into this thing, and all I would do is make a mess. So I can't change anything that's going to happen here today. I am simply going to be a part of it, and I'm going to have a great time." And let me tell you, gay people know how to party. They are fun to be around if you allow that to happen, and especially in a wedding and a party like this thing, man, they know how to dress. And I mean, I had an absolutely good time, and I went to bed that night, and I was at peace. And I realized that this thing, I was very aware that this is an individual decision. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. I think that, yes, I would go, no, I wouldn't go. You've got to let God help you decide that. And so it boils down to an individual decision. And then for my own personal walk, I have no regret. I have no regret to this day about that. And there have been other situations, as now they've been married coming up on 2 years, that have made me know that I was in the right place at the right time.
That sounds good.
If the question isn't me, I'll have the mic.
All right. I know we don't have much time left here. What I wanted to communicate to you guys was this, and this is what I hope with the story. I don't believe, should you go to a gay wedding or should you not go to a gay wedding, I don't believe it's as black and white oftentimes as we want to make it. For myself personally, I think we as Christians have to be very careful of the way in which we communicate our position. See, we're told in our world today that we are not allowed to take a position. The fact that we take a position is already we are being judgmental and whatever else. Jesus himself says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me." That's a very judgmental decision that he said. And Jesus himself says, if you're going to follow me, you will be hated by men. So we shouldn't let that change our willingness to take a position. But the way in which we actually act upon that position may be subjective in certain circumstances. And so I go to this particular circumstance like with Jerry and hearing his story, man, I think, what would I have done? And in my conversation with Jerry, I said, is it possible, Jerry, that because of the disconnect that had shaped your relationship with your son, one of the things for you to go was to communicate that even though there was that disconnect in the past, there was still a desire to still connect. I know of another story, and you guys maybe know this person if I would share his name. This person decided not to go to the wedding because he said, by being present at the wedding, do you remember that statement? If you don't think anybody should do this marriage, well, speak now or forever hold your peace. Your presence there communicates, doesn't it? So by you being present, you're communicating, I do this. I agree with this. So in that particular case, this person says, no, I don't feel comfortable being there, but I'm going to go to the reception. What's done is done, but now that it's done, I'm going to still go to the reception. Is that the better way to do it? I guess what I wanted you to hear is this. I don't think, once again, that it's as black and white as we want to do it. Just like Jesus turning the water into wine. Do we go to John chapter 2 and say, well, Jesus obviously condones drunkenness now? He turned water into wine. He made drunk people get even drunker. I don't think we can say that. Because clearly the Bible speaks elsewhere in other cases about drunkenness. So I wanted you to hear a story because I think it helps us to understand this is lots of layers. we as parents, there's a lot of factors that go into it with that sheet of how you're going to respond. Maybe you're in the middle of this. Maybe you've reached now to the acceptance stage. I know from my journey, and I'll close with this. One of the things for my daughter, when she came through that journey, and she came out on the other side, one of the decisions we had told her was, we said, Mal, I will not use your preferred pronouns. That was a decision that we made. Okay, now some would say, no, you're supposed to. You have to use preferred pronouns. We had made a decision in our house that I know who you are in my brain, and I feel like if I use your preferred pronouns, because at the time she thought she was transgender, if I start using he pronouns or him or whatever else, I feel like I'm lying to myself at this moment. But in order to not be a stumbling block to you, rather than using a pronoun, I will call you Mal. Even if a pronoun would fit better here, I will still say the word Mal, because she thought Mallory was her dead name. If you don't know what a dead name is, it's the name that you used to have before you changed your gender identity. So that it's a big problem out there to dead name somebody. So I would say, okay, out of fairness, out of respect, out of love for you, I will call you Mal. So we did that for a time. And she fought with us. She still wanted us to use her pronouns, and we wouldn't do it. And so we came out to the other side, and fast forward later. And I remember Mallory coming to me one day, and she thanked us for not using the pronouns. Because she said, it would have been really odd to then have you go back. It's like I was in a spot here, and if you would have played along with it, what would that have said to me? And so because we maintain this identity, but should you always do it that way? I don't know. What I'm telling you here is each situation is unique. And so the thing about the gospel is God says, come into a relationship with me. Allow me to live my life through you. And he will lead you, and he will guide you. He will. So I know there's probably a lot more we could talk about, a lot of things. I hope that our discussion today, if did nothing else but to push you to say, your response is really between you and the Lord. I love the verse there in Colossians 3. Let the peace of God umpire how you are to respond in your particular situations. Because it's messy. It's a messy, messy thing out there. Next week, we're going to talk about the gospel, and what does the gospel speak to this? How do we understand? Even the question is, are we born this way? We're going to talk about that next week. Can you say, I'm born gay? Can you say that? And is there any biblical basis for it? We're going to talk about that particular issue and how to respond to some of these things. So next week, same time, same bat channel, for those of you who are old enough to remember that. Let's close in prayer. God, I know we ran out of time. There's lots of things we could talk about. But I am thankful that you promised to never leave us or forsake us, just like Jerry's story. You promise you will never leave us, you'll never forsake us. And may we understand what that means in terms of how we are walking through this life with our loved ones. Like in Jerry's case with his son Matthew. It was a way to be able to show your love for Jerry and your love for Matthew by him doing that. But God, may we also have the wisdom to know where maybe doing that would send the wrong message, that it really would create maybe difficulties later on, like my journey with Mallory. So may we know on how to do that, and may we step out confidently and boldly, knowing that you are the leader, you're the guider, and you're going to show us what we need to do in these cases. So we love you. We are so thankful for your grace that is limitless. May we be able to be grace-filled people toward others as well. So thank you for this time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If you want to stick around.